Hey, very good morning, good afternoon, good evening. My name is Sean.
This is Alex.
And you're listening to another episode of Coaster Kings Radio. Today's episode is all about Universal Studios Singapore. So I recently went to Universal Studios Singapore, kind of super last minute out of nowhere. And then we went together last week or 2 weeks ago. And we had a great time. And so today we'll kind of just discuss about experiences from both visits. Kind of in an educational tour, maybe.
Yeah, so Sean and I, everybody probably already knows this, well, maybe not everybody. We're flight attendants, that's our job. And Sean has had multiple layovers in Singapore this summer. These were his first ever Singapore layovers. And the first two, I couldn't join him because it was too short of notice. But on the third one, I was able to come with. So Sean went to Universal Studios on his first Singapore layover, and then on his third one with me. And I literally just flew out with him for the layover. We were, we did a day and a half in Singapore, and then we bounced. And it was primarily for Universal. We did some other stuff too. We had a really excellent time. Would you say the second visit was better than your first? I mean, your first visit was like really exciting.
Well, first visit was good too. I got a lot done, and I don't know. Probably the second was better because we were doing it together. I wasn't like a loner.
I felt like really confident about it.
And it was a nice rope drop because the first time I went, I wasn't there until like noon because I didn't get in until the morning. Remember, and I couldn't buy tickets, so it was like a whole thing. So this time, I guess it's much streamlined this time.
Yeah, we got there in ample time. One of the nice things about Singapore is that it's really tiny. So like everything that we did, we kind of were ahead of schedule. We were like some of the first people let into the park because we were some of the first people buying tickets and waiting to get in. It ended up being like a very, in my opinion, it was a very low stress experience because we had ample time, we were rested, and then like the weather was great, even though the forecast, like originally the forecast called for some rain, but the rain ended up not really having an effect. Yeah, for most of the day, but
it didn't really get much at all.
It was sunny, partly cloudy with like sprinkles of rain periodically. But yeah, it ended up being like in my opinion, like a really pleasant, low stress visit, considering that there was like so much we wanted to do in a short period of time. We just were like out in front of it the whole day, and the whole day just went like really smoothly. How long were we even at the park? We didn't even spend but 4.5, 5 hours
No, we were there from like 9:30. Well, I guess we got into the park at 9:45, and then we left maybe like 3 o'clock.
Okay, yeah. So we spent
maybe a good 6 hours there.
Yeah, we spent a solid
maybe a little less, 5 hours.
5 hours, 5.5 hours maybe of writing stuff. Pardon me, I'm getting over a little cough, but
you're deathly ill.
Yeah, just the flight attendant immune system doing its best. But yeah, we had a fantastic time. We've now been to every Universal Park and every Disney park. This was the final of like the 18 parks that comprise the Disney and Universal global lexicon. And it was a fun one to end on because it was, I thought, a really exciting park to be the last of the world's like major chain film studio theme parks to hit. It's exciting, exotic. It's like really isolated. Like you really go far. Like it's about, I think of all of the Disney and Universal parks, this one's the farthest from the United States, technically, right?
Yeah,
like,
yeah.
Either as the crow flies or like taking an airplane. Any way you look at it, it's just about as far from Florida as possible.
So, biggest thing to know if you go to University of Singapore is that it is located on an entertainment kind of island. Singapore is not very big. It's like just a city, really. It's like a city, country, all in one. But the park itself is part of Resorts World, which is a big third-party conglomerate that has a bunch of resorts around the world. And this particular complex is on Sentosa Island, so it's a small island attached to Singapore. And it is not operated by Universal. It is operated by Resorts World. So if you look for any information or buy tickets, you're going to do all that through the Resorts World website, if it works for you, because for most people it doesn't. But it's all Resorts World. So it's not technically Universal that operates it, but it is a Universal branded theme park. It's almost like the Oriental Inn Company with Tokyo Disney, except for operations at Tokyo Disney are far superior to what Sentosa or Resorts World has to offer operationally. But that's kind of one thing you have to know about it. And then you can either get there by taking the metro and then towards Sentosa, and then you can take either the monorail or the sky ride from the metro station to get around the resort. Or you can choose to just like hop into a taxi or get a Grab. A Grab is like Uber. You can order both ride shares and taxis on the Grab. Just like you're grabbing groceries, like that word grab.
Grab, yep.
Just download the app and then link your payment. It's pretty quick. You can use that to get around Singapore and to get to Universal. And then they drop you off really conveniently in this underground garage that's right below the park. So both my visits I've done that to go in and to leave, actually. So that's pretty convenient. I would recommend doing that. And then when you want to buy tickets for the park, I would recommend try to buy them online in advance if you really want to, but I don't think they ever really sell out. There's a bunch of really convenient kiosks that are right near the park entrance, and you can just buy your tickets for the day and add an express pass right there on the machine, and it prints it right out for you. It's quite convenient, so I don't really think you have to buy them in advance, because for me that didn't work when I tried it the first time. Mm-hmm. So I just bought it at the park, and we did it again last time. And so I would recommend adding express pass. It's a good value. So this resort, the tickets, I think, are 83 Singapore dollars, and then the fast pass like 100 Singapore dollars, which I think translated into 150 total. Yeah, maybe 160 total per person. It really wasn't terrible. Not compared to the rest of the Universal parks. Yeah.
Yeah. So we showed up. It was just the whole thing felt pretty chill. We showed up, definitely buy the express pass. I don't think there's like a scenario where buying the express pass isn't a good idea, because like
this resort particularly.
Park's always busy, and it's always going to have, like, kind of mixed operations. And Express Pass has its own, like, entrance. It's, like, all the way to the left when you're looking at the park, and it is, like...
Yeah, look for the cute little Art Deco Universal icon, and then you'll find it. I was really impressed with that.
Yeah, you can't queue up for it too early, because that's the entrance for the the breakfast thing that they do.
Yeah, breakfast in the park.
Yeah.
So you either dine at, I think it's two dining locations. Either it's the Mel's Diner or one other location. And then you have like character meet and greets, and it starts at like 8 a.m.
Yeah, and Transformers, Sesame Street.
And then you get into the park, like you're already in the park before the park opens. So like you'll be the first to do rides and stuff. So when we walked in, we were the very first guests in. So when we waited for the express pass, we were like the first people in. And of course, we power walked.
Yeah. And
as we turned the corner towards New York Sci-Fi City, we noticed that there was already like a lot of people like taking photos of characters. And like, there was already a good crowd in Sci-Fi City because they were all there from the
It seems like a really cute and clever event, and a great way to get a meal knocked out. Well,
I wonder if they run Transformers early for that, because
Yeah, well, the app said that Transformers opened at 8 that day.
Maybe that's what part of the park. Oh, that's what it
Transformers, Sesame Street, and the stunt show, the Lights, Camera, Action show. I think those
so anything open in the streets of New York, and then
so like Hollywood and Sci-Fi City, Hollywood and New York, and the Canopy into Sci-Fi City, I think, are what opens for that event. And even if you're like, I mean, I don't know how expensive it is. It's probably not a bad deal. We didn't get up until like 8 o'clock, so that wouldn't have been something for us.
Actually, we were way before that because we walked all through, and we got.
That's true.
We went to get breakfast at a place, and we walked to Luck and Coffee and Duo. We were up early,
kind of naturally, but we would have had to have like really planned it.
Yeah,
I mean, we weren't terribly worried about riding those rides anyway, and like you get on them with Express. If you're getting Express Pass, it's like a little redundant. But the cool thing is that like you really do get like front of the line access to any other rides you want once the park opens, because you're already inside the park. You're already like in New York and Sci-Fi City by the time the public is let in. But yeah, by the time we got in, most people were still eating their breakfast, and like we were among the first people in line for Battlestar Galactica Cylon, which of course was our first priority. The Battlestar Galactica coasters are definitely like the signature attraction for Singapore and like the focal point for the resort, at least for the park. And we bookended our visit with rides on both coasters. There's 2 coasters. For those of you unfamiliar, it's a dueling launched Vekoma coaster attraction featuring a more family-friendly sit-down version with no inversions called Human, and a 5-inversion inverted coaster side called Cylon. And
this, of course, all has to do with the Battlestar Galactica franchise, particularly the 2004 TV series, which has been rated the #1 sci-fi series in the whole world by Rotten Tomatoes. And when this park was being built, this series was all the hot rage for Universal when it came to television making. And so it's based on that particular part of the franchise. Quick rundown on the theme of it is that Earth, or actually not Earth, there is a human population on some planets pretty far away, and it's like a set of planets, and then on the Caprica, one of the planets, the Cylons, which are human-invented robots, artificial intelligence, take over and pretty much destroy all of humanity. Now, there is a battleship out there in space that is the Battlestar Galactica, and that houses a military and remaining humans, and it's a whole fleet of survivors is this kind of like roaming through space trying to find their next place to live and then fight off all the Cylons. And the Cylons are always chasing them, which is the robots, the artificial intelligence, to like finish off and kill the rest of humanity. So the human side is the human fighter pilots that are in the human like space fighter jets.
It's
and then
Colonial Mark II Viper.
And then the Cylons are
in a Cylon Raider.
Yeah, which Cylon Raiders look a little bit different in the franchise, but the face of them are correct on the actual. Yeah, I'm a little bit of a Battlestar Galactica fan, which is why this right so I am on my bucket list forever.
We're big fans of Katie Sackhoff, and she even does. It's
so
like
all this it's just like done fried. So anyway, so when you are riding the Battlestar side, you are on the Colonial Viper, and if you are on the Cylon side, you are leaving the base star. So it's like one side of the building is themed to being the Battlestar ship, and the other one is themed to being the base star ship, and then you leave from the base star on the Cylon Raiders. And so really the theme is that it's like an active battle between Vipers. Like it's a military battle between the Raiders and the Vipers of each side of the conflict. But do you ever race to the point where that is really an accurate part of your story? No.
Not anymore.
Not anymore.
Yeah, that's the only bummer about Battlestar Galactica in my mind is that they don't function as a dueling coaster in practice. And I think there's a couple of reasons for that. One, for, ever since the Dueling Dragons incidents of 2011, I think they have probably scaled back on that being a component of the attraction. Even in, the promotional videos that they use to, demonstrate what the rides do in the queue, the rides are not dueling. And it's old footage. It's back from when, the Cylon side was still blue. It hasn't been that color in years. It was probably right after they did the train fix in 2015. This ride has had a really interesting history. But I will just say out front that, the rides don't duel. And it's kind of a bummer because you think, it's how the ride should be intended. That's how it should be. It seems really cool that they were designed the way that they are, and then kind of a bummer that they don't duel. But I think it's probably less of a drawback than it was when Dueling Dragons stopped dueling, because both of these coasters are really good in their own right, and they don't have quite as much, layout meandering articulation that is, in the context of the other coaster. I feel like if you took each half of Dueling Dragons and put them separately, you'd have two really awkward looking coasters with lots of straightaways and just weird sprawling choices that really only make sense in relationship to each other. But for the Battlestar coasters, you could take one or the other and put them somewhere, and it would still be a totally strong and ideal coaster experience that wouldn't seem like it begs to have another coaster wrapped around it. That makes sense.
Oh, yeah, totally. Now, the nice thing is that I feel like a lot of coasters, when they're designed to be dueling, they in a way kind of feel formulaic and very similar. But the way that they designed Battlestar Galactica is every element of it is something you've never really felt before. I kind of call, especially the Cylon side, a giant inverted boomerang meets a family thrill coaster, the more modern version of the SLC.
Yeah, the suspended thrill coaster.
It's just that it's highly suspended. It's very forceful. It's bulky. It has the weirdest elements.
Even the sound.
You know, like it's just by them having designed this very, very compact racing coaster. It's very long on both sides.
Coasters are amazingly compact.
Incredibly compact. I mean, when this episode comes out, go to thecoasterkings.com. We've got a big gallery there of photos because I took like 300 photos of Battlestar Galactica, and I spent like hours editing them. You can really see how completely intertwined the rides are, and then it's also hovering over the lake and over the park's walkways, and it's just overall a very impressive ride. So I really like the ride layout for that particular reason. Yeah. But I feel like we should kind of discuss Battlestar Galactica a little bit more towards the end of the episode, because I actually want to do
greater detail later.
Do kind of a rundown of it, because otherwise we spend too much time talking about one thing in the beginning of the episode, I think. Yeah.
So we'll kind of go around the park counterclockwise, because I think that's how, right now that's the only way that you can go around the park. They have a Minions area opening in beginning of 2025. It looks close to being done based on what we just saw. But right now, the Minions area is the first area on the left of the loop, and it's all closed off. It used to be the Madagascar area. The park opened with like a completely fleshed out roster and like no apparent space for like major whole area expansions. So in order to like accommodate expansions that involved new themed areas altogether, it involved cannibalizing the existing Madagascar area. And like the Madagascar area used to have a boat ride that was like plagued with issues and like never ran as intended. Mechanical issues. It had a fire at one point. It was supposed to have a drop, and then like the splashdown aspect of it was like causing electrical fires and like damaging the inside. Like the ride was plagued with issues, so I think the resort was low-key not even that bothered to like demolish that ride in order to replace it with new stuff. Much of the Madagascar area, as we knew it, was is being replaced by Minions, Minion Park area. And it's getting Despicable Me, Minion Mayhem, and 2 flat rides. And then much of the area that was actually occupied by the physical dark ride, the Madagascar dark ride, is, by all accounts, going to be a Super Nintendo expansion. One that is designed specifically for the very narrow plot that Universal Singapore has at their disposal. But they've been talking about, they announced both of these areas in 2019. Minions is almost done. There's construction going on in the other half of the area that is earmarked for Super Mario. So hopefully that goes according to plan. I'm looking forward to seeing how both of those areas turn out. All this to say, when you enter the park, you have to turn right and go counterclockwise. And for us, that also means skipping the attractions in the New York area to focus on Battlestar Galactica and really the coasters, getting the coasters in. So for us, we did the Battlestar Galactica coasters, and then we continued right next door to Ancient Egypt, which is the themed area that Universal Singapore developed to encapsulate the Revenge of the Mummy roller coaster. It is a variation on the Revenge of the Mummy at Universal Studios Florida, Universal Resort Orlando, Universal Orlando Resort.
Wow, how bad can you mess up?
Universal Escape.
Universal Orlando Resort.
Universal City Walk. But yeah, so it's essentially the same ride. It's the same layout, and there's a lot of scenes that are either identical or similar, but it doesn't have like the filmmaking component. There's no Brendan Fraser asking for his coffee. There's none of that. It's a much smarter overall execution. It has better overall theme elements. It has a cooler, longer queue. I mean, having the whole Egypt area is really nice. It's the only one of the Mummy coasters that actually takes place like in a themed area that's for the ride. And I would say it's kind of like a mix of Hollywood's theme components and lore, and then like the physicality of the Orlando ride. And we rode it a couple times, really enjoyed it. Thought it was really well maintained overall, and a really solid like dark ride coaster experience. And definitely worth riding, even if you're very familiar with the Orlando one. In fact, the more familiar you are with the Orlando one, I think the more fun it is to single out the differences and the unique animatronics and sequences and stuff on this ride that really pop when you're comparing it to the Orlando version, and if you're really familiar with the Orlando version. And then the rest of the Egypt area is really cute. There's a great restaurant, an Indian restaurant there that we ate at. And then they have one other ride, which is an antique car ride themed to driving around a geological exposition. And there's like little animatronics and stuff. The line for it is really long, so we didn't ride it. But you can walk all around it and admire the cuteness of it and such without blowing an hour in line.
So going back to the Mummy for a little bit, like Alex said, it's kind of like a perfect marriage between the Hollywood and aesthetic, and then having the ride experience of the one in Orlando here.
Yeah.
It's funny because we look at like the overall map of the park, like a blueprint. You can see that like it's pretty much the largest singular attraction building that there is. Like it is a major attraction for them, and it feels that way. The queue is massive. I've never seen a queue that long or that big in a Universal ride. It seems to go on forever. But yeah, I do really like the ride. I do think maybe it could have a little bit of a touch up, like the last animatronic or like the shaking coffin thing. And then there's some parts that I prefer on the Hollywood one, where I think the Hollywood one thematically is very strong because everything is so small. The scenes that seem more detailed, and when you go through, you have that like the scene where all the arms come from the ceiling and stuff, and you've got the warriors jumping down next to Imhotep. Like that's the Hollywood one. I think is a little bit more of a spectacular edge to it, and I kind of wish that carried over a little bit better into the ride, but it's still a much superior version to the Orlando one, I think. Like, I really just enjoy the overall experience of that ride. And it's very polished with its giant tall ceilings when you enter the building. And the presence of the ride here
it's so
like,
nice.
Here it's like
it's
really
so cool.
like it's themed to a tomb, and it's themed to like there's a whole land for it. It's where the other ones are smashed into like either themed to a soundstage or themed to like
like a museum, the Metropolitan.
Like this at least really feels like it is like the presence, the grandness, the grandiosity of it all. For this ride, is really, really nice.
It's really what this ride has always deserved. So, if you're a big fan of the Mummy coasters, like, you're going to love this. This will be probably your favorite one.
Oh, yeah, for sure.
And so, yeah, from there, you continue on up to
Jurassic Park.
I think the largest area of the park, which is the Lost World area.
So, the Lost World is made up out of two worlds. You got Jurassic Park, The Lost World, which is the second movie's name.
Yeah.
And then you have Waterworld. And while you think, oh, they're kind of one area, they're actually not as much of one area as one may think. They're just kind of lumped together as like a section of the park. But they're very, very clearly separated. You cannot really notice Waterworld's existence unless you pay close attention from Jurassic Park area, and vice versa. Because Waterworld's really tucked away in the back of the park and has a giant walkway to the main walkway. And then squished between the other side of the park and Mummy...
they're definitely compartmentalized.
You have Jurassic Park, and Jurassic Park is the lushest of all Jurassic Parks. I mean, it's because it's one way in and the same way out. It really feels kind of like a really cohesive area where the sidelines are perfectly done. And what's nice about this one is because where you enter, you have the Jurassic Park food court, which is kind of like the Discovery Center on the lagoon side, and then really the Jurassic Park itself with the giant gates on the other side. And within that, you have three rides. You have a family spinning ride, kind of like the flying carpets
thing, yeah.
And then you have a massive, what is the biggest ride I think in the whole resort, is the Jurassic Park Rapids Adventure, which is a really large water ride that is to the scale of
like Popeyes.
I would say, but I also would say I would say it's to the scale of a Jurassic Park water ride that we're used to in Osaka and Hollywood and Orlando. But it has a completely different ride mechanism, which enhances it because there's way more turns, there's way more scenery. We'll talk about it in a second.
It's huge. I was so impressed.
We have the flying-ish coaster. It's a family suspended coaster that is the Canopy Flyers. Yeah. And that swings over the lagoon where the splashdown is. But yeah, so talk a little bit about the Rapids Adventure. Jurassic Park Rapids Adventure is what the name implies, the Rapids ride. And it is... themed kind of similarly to like you have your station is kind of like, like you're going on a boat tour and then you're going to see all the dinosaurs, which is kind of what the premise has been of all of them. And so you do that, but then there was a recent crazy rainfall, like a monsoon, which caused all these mudslides. So what really happened is everything's flooding. So you start off with your animals, and I will say it's only a very small part of most of the Jurassic Parks are like, oh, it's all going very well for like half the ride, and then shit kind of starts happening. For this ride, it's like a quarter of the ride is going as planned.
Like, all hell breaks loose.
It's like, oh, here's a couple animals. This is really cute. Look at all the fog. And then it's like, oh shit, everything's flooding. And then there's a sequence of events, including mudslides and like the flooding of one of the maintenance bays we're supposed to be disembarking, and then more mudslides and giant waterfalls, and then escaped raptors. So like it's a lot of shit goes wrong for a long time, which is kind of fun, I think. And it's just a very, very pretty ride. I mean, the waterfall scene is awesome.
Great visuals.
The mudslides and going through the forest, where it's like a jungly ride. It's my preferred version of all of them, except for I like the polishedness of the Jurassic World one, despite it still only being a few S turns. The Hollywood one, and then having the really spectacular finale. I think the overall, like from a ride perspective, of all the water rides for Jurassic Park is my favorite one because it's so long and it has all the little chutes and the drops and all that kind of fun stuff. Really enjoyable. And then I'll have Alex talk a little bit about the indoor portion of the ride.
Yeah, so it has a really lengthy indoor part.
Very lengthy.
It doesn't start with a lift hill. There is no lift hill, actually, on this ride, except for like going in and out of the station. It has like a pretty meandering ground level indoor portion that then kind of feeds you into these hoppers. It's a 2-shaft elevator lift system with 2 separate drops that both spill out into the splashdown. So you still get that satisfying like Jurassic River Adventure-esque drop at the end. It's smaller, but when you're on a rapids ride, it feels really intense and big and steep and very satisfying. It definitely follows similar events. You get the T-Rex moment there right before you drop. It's definitely in a similar vein, but it's more spectacular in a lot of ways. Like the outdoor portions of the ride where things go awry are way more exciting, and it goes on for a while. There's just a lot. There's a lot of unique visuals on this ride, and it's just a fabulous length. It goes on for quite some time, and it's very cleverly space oriented in the park, and was a great solution to wanting to do a river adventure type ride, but not having the space, like the oblong plot to work with that the other 2 more modern river adventure boat rides had to work with. So yeah, great ride there. And then the other 2 rides, I really enjoyed Canopy Flyer. Like Hell or High Water, we found that like Universal is going to put a miniature suspended coaster of some kind in their Jurassic Park area. Like they always, well, I guess with Japan they didn't, but then they eventually put a flying coaster there. Yeah. Well, Hollywood doesn't, I don't ever think of Hollywood as having a Jurassic Park area. Just a ride. For the fleshed out areas, this was like the Canopy Flyer was the evolution of Pteranodon Flyer. Has higher capacity. It uses this almost identical ride system to Roller Soaker at Hershey Park and the Flying Super Saturator at Carowinds. Both are defunct suspended water coasters at their respective parks. It's technically, I think, the same product line, and now the only ride of this exact system from Setpoint left. And Setpoint is the company that I think they helped develop Pteranodon Flyer. I know that's the company that maintains it. And they're also the company behind the new Donkey Kong Country Minecart Madness roller coaster that's being developed with Universal. So, like what you're riding on Canopy Flyer is like an inverted version of the track system, actually, that they use for the Boom coaster for the Donkey Kong Country coaster. Really fun. This ride had pretty solid capacity for what it was. It's a tiny little ride, but it runs 5 vehicles. And we waited like half an hour-ish. And I thought it was really fun. You either get to go forward or backward for the whole ride. It's a cute ride. It's a nice ambient thing. Overall, I think it's a much more successful ride than Pteranodon Flyers because like anyone can ride it. And the line, like the capacity is like exponentially better than Pteranodon Flyer. And the coaster itself, I think, is more fun too. We didn't do Waterworld just because like we had limited time. We were doing the park and also like various Singapore things. So even though we did Waterworld in Beijing and that was really fun, we went ahead and skipped it at this park. We didn't do it in Osaka either. But it's cool that they have it. It's a nice, like, it's probably just for them like an easy choice to include that with Singapore. If you want to add something to your park, in a new market that is going to work and has like international broad appeal. It's just like an easy, good.
I mean, I think the whole
choice.
stunt show point period is always smart in a like theme park theme to studios. I mean, I know that theme is slowly dying, but when this park opened, I think Waterworld, like Alex said, was a very, very, very smart choice. But yeah, just to go back to Jurassic Park for one more second, I think the overall area is very clean, very forested, works very well, and the way that all the rides interact, like having the canopy flyer swinging around the kiddie ride, and then like over the lagoon, having the final helix ride by the splashdown. I mean, I have a couple photos right from the station of the ride of the River Rapids ride, where you see kind of like the boat coming back in, and then the roller coaster swinging over it. Like it all just worked very well, and it's kind of a theme with this park because they designed the whole park all at once, and it fits so nicely together. It's like it makes all the other Universal parks seem too sprawling. Like this park packs so much of a punch in such a small space. It's very, very impressive.
It makes some of the older Universal parks feel kind of cobbled together.
Yeah.
I mean, even Beijing suffers from feeling like there was not as big of an overall plan as there should have been. Because something about the layout of that park feels weirdly disjointed for a park that is brand new. Like, Singapore wins the award for, like, feeling just, like, the most well-optimized, certainly best optimized for space, but also just convenient and like easy to navigate. Navigating the park just could not be easier. On top of the fact that it's like half the size of the next smallest Universal park, and it's just not hard on the feet, not hard on the legs, which is good considering how hot it is and how easy it is to get dehydrated when you're at a theme park that's practically sitting on the equator. So the final area that you access at the current design of the park, with it not being a complete loop at this time, is far, far away, which is the large fairy tale Shrek area, Shrek and Puss in Boots area. And like in the Shrek movies, it's sort of like a Hollywood-esque type area, but it's also fantasy. It's a really cute area. The castle, which is the host of the Shrek 4D ride, which is now an exclusive to Universal Singapore. It's now the only park that has it, even though when it was added, it was like present in at least three other, or at least two other parks.
Because of it being a whole land for it. Yeah.
So I'm happy for them that now they have something that is unique. I know it really doesn't matter from a marketing standpoint, but when you're looking at all the Universal parks together, it's just yet another attraction that Singapore has that none of the other parks have. In this area, you'll find their kiddie coaster, Enchanted Airways, which is like an especially cute Vekoma roller skater. It's the same layout as Flight of the Hippogriff, and it's got a really cute station. It's got some really nice like theme effects around the ride. They were running 2 trains on our visit, so like there was no line. Love that. Inside the exit gift shop for Shrek 4D is actually another ride. They have a tiny little Ferris wheel that is literally inside of the gift shop. That is just so clever and smart, and like you wouldn't know. I'm glad we went in there because I wouldn't have known if I hadn't like seen it like on TikTok or something. But I was like, we have to go inside the gift shop and see the little baby Ferris wheel. And then they have an indoor theater, and then at the end of the far midway, is the Puss in Boots Giant Journey Zamperla Suspended Family Story Coaster that I thought was just wonderful. Like, Universal Singapore is full of, like, one-of-a-kind
This is what I wish was built in the new
DreamWorks area,
DreamWorks land.
Florida.
I wish that they had just, like, stuck with a single franchise, maybe, or even if they did two franchises or 3 franchises. I wish a ride like this would have fit there, because Puss in Boots Giant Journey, it is a pretty high capacity, because they dispatch 18 people at a time, which is pretty decent for a family kids roller coaster.
Yeah, for a
coaster.
I
wouldn't even say it's a kids roller coaster. I would say it's a family roller coaster. It's pretty big.
It's a must ride.
And it's highly themed. It's incredibly space efficient. I mean, this park knows how to make something space efficient. And I just wish that this is what they would have put in Orlando, because this is the perfect attraction for almost any resort. I'm surprised I haven't seen this kind of coaster again.
I can't believe it hasn't been cloned or the ride system.
But the fact that this wasn't put, for example, in Beijing, like, I'm just surprised. Like, it is a really fun ride. It isn't that short. It has great theming. It tells a fun story. The line moves. the complete package, and the way it's situated in the park, it feels like it was always meant to be there.
Yeah.
Because you have, at the end walkway, you have the big tower, the castle tower, in which there is a spiral lift for the coaster.
Point. Yeah.
And then in the other midway, you have the castle. I mean, the whole area it's just like all the other areas, I think, perfectly designed.
Smart.
And this coaster is just an incredible fit. Oh my god, I love Puss in Boots.
It's adorable. I mean, the scenes... Everything about it, it's just so underrated. Like, I had high hopes. I always enjoyed watching POVs of this one at home, but man, like, I really liked it. And, Zamperla doesn't get a lot of credit. I mean, everybody loves a good, like, Zamperla flat ride, but they don't get a lot of credit in the, like, custom coaster department, or even necessarily in the production model coaster department. But, like, this is a really cool, unique ride where, like, I think Universal Creative had a vision, and, like, Zamperla ended up being, the company to flesh out this concept. And it basically recycles the Volare ride system, but turns it into a suspended family coaster, using the lift hill and stuff. It just, something about it just feels really clever, and it just works so well. So that was a huge highlight. I love this ride. You may have noticed, I mean, the park has 6 coasters. Like, it's a really solid coaster park. It's the only Universal park that has 6 coasters. And all 6 of them are quite different, and 4 of them are totally one of a kind. Like, you can't ride those 4 coasters anywhere else. So yeah, it's a nice setup. Once you, for us, since the park is not a current loop right now, you hit the end of... Far, far away, and then you backtrack via the inside loop of the park. The main midway is
the best loop. Well, they're both pretty good loops, but that's the best loop.
The main midway is a giant outside loop that, like, all the attractions are sitting on. There's a small lagoon in the center of the park, Islands of Adventure style. This park really feels like it's a distilled, compact, like, travel-friendly version of Islands of Adventure, where everything is there, but it's just, like, 50% of the size.
Maybe 75%. I mean, 50% would be very, very small.
Yeah, but I mean, this park is only 62 acres. And then, like, Islands of Adventure is like 120. Anyway, one thing that they did even better than Islands of Adventure is, like...
Having a bunch of abandoned stadiums, yeah.
Yeah, that too. Is Islands of Adventure, there's only really one way to get around the park, and that is via the main artery. Even though there's lots of, like, inland or, like, waterside guest areas in the parks... they're not particularly purposeful. They're like the area, the loop around Ship the Olive, and like the little loop underneath the Seuss Trolley train ride and stuff. Like, they're there and people use them, but they're not exactly very practical. And at Universal Studios Singapore, all of these like little inland walkway areas, or not inland, but like water inside center, these little center waterside areas of each of the park are actually all connected to make like a smaller central ring of midway, which again makes the park feel like really convenient to walk around in and access. You're really never very far from anything in the park, and anything can be accessed more quickly via the little shortcuts that the inner midway loop affords. So for us, by that point, we had gotten all the coasters and in the water ride. Then we took the inner loop back around the front side, around the water side of the Jurassic Discovery Center, around the water side of the Egypt area, like where the antique car ride, the treasure hunter car ride, goes up against the water. And then underneath, like the first drops of the Battlestar Galactica coasters, there's a walking area. And then back around on the water side of the New York area, and then over to Mel's Diner, which has like a 180-degree like storefront face that faces the entrance plaza, like the center hub that you reach at the end of the Hollywood Midway. It's adjacent to the New York Street Midway, and then also adjacent to the water. And then from there, we checked out the park's 2 traditional-style dark rides. The Sesame Street Dark Ride, is Sesame Street Spaghetti Space Chase, I think is the official name. Yep. So cute. This attraction was originally supposed to be a walkthrough. It was called Stage 28, and it was announced with the opening attractions of Universal Studios Singapore. Universal Singapore had, like, some trouble getting off the ground. I think so many of the attractions were delayed that they ended up calling their opening season just like a dress rehearsal. So it opened in 2010 as a dress rehearsal, and then a year later, spring of 2011, they had an official opening of the park. And part of that was related to the Battlestar Galactica coasters were not ready. They ran for like a week during the dress rehearsal, and then they closed for a year for retooling. The Madagascar boat ride did not open to the public until 2011. And then for whatever reason, this Stage 28 attraction, which was supposed to be like a Hollywood prop walkthrough of some sort, so it's kind of murky, the actual details, but like that never opened and then was retooled completely into a dark ride. They repurposed the space as a dark ride for Sesame Street, and that opened in 2012, I believe. And the Transformers dark ride also opened in 2011, at the end of 2011, like about 6 months after the park's official grand opening, which is about 18 months after the dress rehearsal period started. So really by the end of 2011, start of 2012 is when the park was fully fleshed out with its various rides. And I guess like Sesame Street would more or less be like the first, or the last wave, the last ride of like the original wave of attractions that came online over the course of the park's like first year, 2 years of varied operations. It's a really cute ride. There's like no queue for it. It's all outside because I think when they pivoted and decided to do a dark ride, they were just like, well, we need all the space that we've got to make this an actual ride, and we can't afford to like lose any of it to queue. So it has a cute entrance. It's the entrance that is like sort of how the Mummy and the Spider-Man are respectively at Universal Studios Florida and Universal Japan. And you enter, so you go in, and then you go right back outside to the overflow queue. And then you load into a continuous loading suspended dark ride system that holds 2 rows of 2 people. The ride that I would compare it the most to, like vibe-wise, obviously the theme is Sesame Street. Really cute. Very just adorable little small-scale scenes with lots of physical props, physical animatronics, and everything's like really up close. It reminded me a lot of the Peter Pan dark rides in like style and scope.
Oh, totally. I just think it's a much more polished ride than almost any of the Peter Pans. Peter Pan in Shanghai is nice, yeah. Also, Shanghai has a larger scope than this ride. But it's just like a nicer version, highly detailed, very well themed, fun, cute story. I think the overall quality of most attractions here is quite good, and that is a perfect encapsulation of how they do what's maybe already kind of familiar with the average theme park goer, but then like did it in more of a unique way, which I think is the case with almost every attraction there, except for maybe the super clones like Transformers and Mummy, even though Transformers originally launched at Singapore.
Yeah,
so it's like a Singapore original as well.
Singapore OG.
And then the storyline for the for Imhotep's book, whatever, is also original to Singapore. So in a way, there's really nothing there that's not that original.
Yeah, even the clones are like worth revisiting.
So that's no exception for Space Chase either. And then one thing I want to mention before I even forget about mentioning it in general is that the audience for Universal Studios Singapore doesn't necessarily have a lot of experience with high-quality themed attractions. I think that's why Universal's so popular. Every time I've been, the park's been pretty packed. So it seems to be a well-attended Singapore attraction. It's well-known. And when you think about it, much of the surrounding countries, including Malaysia and Indonesia, for example, India, there's a lot of visitors from there, Bangladesh. Like, there's a lot of visitors from that part of Asia, which makes sense because Singapore is kind of in the middle of all that. Those countries aren't home to like crazy, well-themed, high-quality attractions, except for now there is in Malaysia Genting Skyworlds, and that is the same company that operates Resorts World Sentosa. So, but other than that, there really aren't many companies or attractions out there in the vicinity where maybe the majority of the tourists come from that is that quality. And maybe you've got visitors from like China, of course. There's a lot of Chinese people in Singapore. And then Hong Kong, maybe have experience with Hong Kong Disneyland. But generally speaking, I think that for the region, I was telling Alex in the line for Battlestar Galactica, there's a good chance a lot of people here, like, some people are freaking out, like, oh my god, like the big roller coaster. In our head, we're like, kind of forget in Orlando sometimes that everyone there is used to theme parks, used to roller coasters, used to like that whole song and dance. But the amount of people that we witnessed in University of Singapore, like Battlestar Galactica, is like the craziest shit they've ever seen.
It was,
and it's exciting because I'm like, yeah, Battlestar, and they're like, yeah, crazy big roller coaster. I was so scared. Like, I loved it.
Like Battlestar Galactica Cylon, like one of the things that we noticed was that people were like looking at it and like cowering in fear and like genuinely afraid to ride it. Human was a little easier, I think, for most people to like for their palates, but like the park will never open another major thrill ride because Cylon really pushes people to their limits, like their audience. It's definitely well outside of the comfort zone of like the average Universal Singapore patron. But anyway, so by this point in the day, we had ridden all the rides we needed to ride. We had our lunch, and then we got our final week. The first rides that we got on Battlestar Galactica, we just waited in the standby queue because it was so early in the day. We saved our Express Pass rides for right before we left, which we were leaving at like the busiest like midday part of the day. So we're like, this will be good to use, conserve, and ride again at the end. And I think the last two rides that we got were also the best rides that we got because the rides were nice and warmed up.
Oh, certainly. I mean, it's so brutally hot out there, yeah.
So the rides, operations aren't the best, but then, like, Universal, even in Florida, operations can be a little iffy. I think the operation for the rides here are decent. They're not as bad as some of the stuff that you'll see, like, in China, and it's not even as bad, in my opinion, as, like, Beijing. I think Beijing's operations are probably the worst. But then we've been hearing some negative stuff about Japan, too.
I mean, our experience in Japan was pretty miserable, too, when we were there. So I feel like, I don't know, just not really used to Universal running a tight ship outside the U.S. parks. Even the U.S. parks are not really that tight.
Unless it's Hollywood, like, there's just no guarantees that things are going to be operated smoothly and optimally.
And I know, of course, that Gensing's, Resorts World operates Universal Studios Singapore, but I don't think the operations were too much of a detractor because I'm already used to Universal operations being kind of shit outside of the States. Yeah, I mean, if you listen to our recent episode about Universal Studios Beijing from a couple months ago, look it up. It's from this season. The operations left a lot to be desired, and I think at this point, that's the exact experience we had in Japan. The amount of money we put down in Japan and in Beijing just to get on attractions, just to get like ahead of the game because the operations were so bad. I mean, in Singapore, it's a way better price, and you buy the Express Pass is a way better deal, and you buy it right out the bat. And I think I had a way more fun, more positive experience at Universal Studios Singapore. But it's also kind of simplified. You don't need the app to download everything. The Express Pass isn't it's
a paper ticket.
Isn't a tier system where you combine two e-tickets and a not e-ticket. You can only ride this ride if you don't choose to ride that ride. Like Japan and Beijing are kind of bullshit when it comes to Express Pass. It's way too complicated for the average bar goer. You have to spend a lot of money to ride everything because you have to buy additional. Here, it's like you buy once, you ride everything once. That's it, man. It's easy. This park is easy. You show up and have a good time. Like that is the nice thing about this park, I think. And
then, so as for, I guess the reason why I bring up operations is like I think for most attractions in the park, operations feel at least good enough to the point where the operations are not drawing attention to themselves. And even in the case of like Puss in Boots and Enchanted Airways, I thought the operations for those coasters were really strong. Canopy Flyer, there's definitely rides where I feel like they're doing the best that they can given the ride's limited capacity. Then there's Battlestar Galactica, which Cylon was only running one train. Human was running two trains. These rides only have two trains each, so like if they're doing maintenance on one of the trains, then like that's it. You're down to one train ops. And there's really no guarantees that both of these coasters will be open at any given time. Like we've heard of people going where like only one side was open. We've heard of people going where it was one train each.
I mean, I had one train each the first time.
We were lucky to see Human running with two trains, although despite the two-train operations on Human, we felt like Cylon's crew was actually doing a better job with one train.
Well, I think it's because Human is historically the more popular ride, maybe because it's more family-friendly, doesn't invert, But they also then bring along more kids, and I think operationally, just getting the trains out seems to be more of a pain on Cylon, on Human. As we're on Cylon, it's mostly adults riding it.
Yeah,
I mean, kids really do seem to be scared off by it.
That's true. And like with Cylon, when you put your stuff off to the side, you just walk past the train instead of having to step in the train to get across it.
Yeah, I think it sounds a bit of a smooth operation. But yeah, I think actual capacity-wise, mustn't have been much of a difference. And then I guess we haven't really talked about the ride experience a whole lot, but except for the fact that the Cylon
go for it.
feels a lot like a giant inverted boomerang meets a family throw coaster. And yeah, the layout is just kind of whack, but like in a good way. So you first of all, the nice thing about both sides is that it's not a lift hill, it's a launch. So you get up there in a hurry, it's quick, it's punchy, it's fun. I'm kind of surprised there are more rides out there that do that, because just launching up those hills, I mean, it's like you're taking off. Like, they're pretty punchy launches. And then you get to the top of the lift or launch really quick, and then you have a pretty noticeable drop. I will say they don't
especially on Human.
On Humans particularly, but they don't look like much of a drop. But because the ride is so tall, I would say it's quite a tall ride. The drop is still quite noticeable and fun. And since they're both straight drops, and on inverts, it's especially unique. It has a nice little floater moment to it. And then you have a really snappy butterfly that almost has the shape of a giant inverted boomerang butterfly cobra roll, where it's really like you enter in one direction and then you make a pretty drastic, almost like 90-degree differentiation how you exit. So it's like a snappy, fun cobra roll where you never really level out. It's like almost like a triangle shape. It's hard to explain, but I really enjoy that. And it's pretty high suspended above the ground. So when you dive down, you can really notice that you are quite far off the ground still. And then you have a couple of moments that are definitely meant for the racing, like a helix that is in the opposite direction of the Human helix. And then you have another little drop, and then you have a corkscrew, and it's really high spin in the air. The corkscrew is one of my
favorite parts.
And then you have, like a helix, and then you dive down underground into the vertical. Like, the whole layout of the ride is so funky. And then you have another helix, or like big turnaround, and then you switch directions twice, and then you have this like inline twist that goes in like a completely unnatural direction, and it feels really weird. And another helix into the break ride. I mean, the ride is very long. Both rides are deceptively
surprisingly long.
Like, they fit so much of these ride layouts.
So snug
in this snug little park. It makes, when you now look at photos of, say, like Dueling Dragons, it almost feels Dueling Dragons was way too sprawling, way too big.
Takes up a lot of space.
Like, they spend way more time lining up the elements than anything else. Where for this ride, they got really creative instead. Yeah. Instead of spending a lot of time building up for these signature B&M elements that, besides maybe like 1 or 2 elements on Dueling Dragons, was just lining up pre-existing elements that B&M had just to line up moments on the coasters by spacing them out with whole straight sections of track. Vekoma was like, all right, so we have tight space, and we're just gonna...
So we can do all sorts of cool
crazy stuff just to make it fit, and then like some signature moments that maybe we can like put in the loop around the lift hills.
The loop is amazing.
And, and that works, but other than that, I feel like the rides are just super creative, and like they just kind of made it all happen and made it all fit, and they share a support structure. Like, every support shares both tracks. It is like an evolution of the concept.
That's the other thing. So I think one of the main reasons that they don't duel the coasters, I mean, occasionally they duel, and it's really cool, but it's like very rarely. It's all about just getting the trains out as quickly as possible, especially considering the frequency with which that one side is running 2 and the other side has 1 train in maintenance. There's just no time. There's no point. Like, you cannot just, like, stifle capacity that way. So I get it. Like, there's that. There's the loose article issue. And then there is the issue of prolonging the ride's service life by not having 2 trains putting stress on the same supports at the same time. Like, that's not something that they may have even worried about that much when the rides were being designed. But because of the closeness of them, like, a lot of the supports are doing double duty. And, like, Vekoma knows how to support a ride. That's why they've got multi-loopers from the 80s that are still going strong with, like, very little track work or support work or anything. But I think in the interest of keeping these rides operating without having to do, like, a major remodel anytime soon, allowing the trains to navigate different areas of the ride at the same time instead of following each other probably really helps with things like keeping issues that you'll find in, like, an X-ray from coming up for, like, several more years. So as frustrating as it is that, like, you have this dueling coaster that doesn't duel, there's a lot of good reasons for them not to do it, especially with like how things panned out with Dueling Dragons. And I would say that it's easier to appreciate these rides as individual coasters than it was to appreciate rides like Dueling Dragons as individual rides. The fact that these coasters aren't dueling is not as big of a distraction from the overall experience as like Dragon's Challenge was when the rides were staggered.
And I mean, like, the big problem with Dueling Dragons, and we talk about this all the time, it's not just location of park. Because location of park was kind of piss poor, and you know, like putting the biggest, highest capacity, 6 times 32 riders in the back of the park, like that makes no sense. That was dumb. Sorry, Universal, but that wasn't the only problem. The other problem was, like, if you don't like thrill rides, you're kind of out of luck. Like, Dueling Dragon wasn't going to be a ride, so now you alienate half the
if you didn't like fire,
attendance.
you weren't going to like ice.
Right, but if you don't like thrill rides or don't like inversions, like, you weren't going to ride either of them, so that's already cuts out part of the audience. And this ride is so perfectly balanced with having, like, a really thrilling side and having a more moderate side. One that is all inversions, one that is 0 inversions. And then just the variety of elements on the one is like has big drops, even though it's more family friendly. It has some pretty intense moments, has drops, has helices, and then the other side is like it's really, you know, more focused on like getting a bunch of different kinds of inversions in there. It's just the rides feel so incredibly different, despite being the same attraction, literally. That I think this is like the perfect kind of racing coaster. It is a genius solution, like the perfect kind
to that problem. It's like they literally took Dueling Dragons and thought, we can optimize this concept and make it work for this unique situation. And also add a little bit of Incredible Hulk in there, too.
Oh, totally. By having the launches.
Yeah.
And having a park that is already so tight on space and needs to really make everything work, being able to offer 2 completely different kinds of experiences, even thematically, one being Cylon or one being a human, thematically, the storytelling in the queue, it's like completely different. The stories are different. It works. It's like the perfect franchise to do that. It's the perfect kind of 2 kind of ride systems to do that. And I don't know how much we've really talked about the ride layout for Human, because Human has a little bit less going on, because even though it's just as long, it just mostly just drops and helices.
Yeah, there's not a lot of
I will say there's some really interestingly, deceptively intense parts. So when you launch it's a good launch, but then you have some airtime on the top, and the drop is steep and it's long.
Yeah.
You drop all the way down to the lagoon, and then it's really forceful, the bottom of the drop, when you go into the giant helix. So I think it's a good mix of maybe some moments of air and some like a switch track in there, and then use helices. It's not nearly as exciting maybe as Cylon is, but I think it's perfect. And I just think it's perfect attraction for the space, for doing the racing. Yeah, exactly.
They're so mesmerizing.
So many photos of them, too. It's crazy.
And one thing, I love how, like, when you were describing, when Sean wrote these in May, it was describing, he's like, it's hard to explain it, but, like, Cylon really is, like, a giant inverted boomerang meets, like, the more modern Vekoma suspended thrill coaster, or even, like, their current, like, looping coaster designs. And it really does translate. Like, that is the perfect description. We are the biggest fans of giant inverted boomerangs. Like, we are the #1 giant inverted boomerang cheerleaders. And not only is the Cobra roll very similar to the butterfly on giant inverted boomerangs, but, like, so the loop on Battlestar Galactica is almost circular. And the reason for that is because it's not very tall. It's actually in, like, the second half of the ride. It's the 4th inversion on the coaster.
It's like...
And so they couldn't make it very tall. They could only do so much as far as, like, the depth where they really bury... I mean, the G-forces going into the loop are crazy. That last ride we had on it, where I was, like, really warmed up, and by the time we got to the loop and you dive down into the misty trench, it was like, I thought I was going to lose my shoes. Really awesome. But I just love that the loop is so circular, just like in the same way that the giant inverted boomerang loops are very circular. They're much bigger. You get, like, more hang time in those. This one, there's no hang time. But I just love the shape of the loop being, like, a necessity. Like, it couldn't be too tall because of the speed of the ride, but it had to be really wide so that both tracks could fit through the loop. And then when you come around, you do the loop and you do a turnaround, and then the 0G roll, same thing. It feels like there's so many clearances that had to be navigated. So the 0G roll has this just great funky shape to it. Kind of reminds me of the first 0G roll on Osiris at Park Asterix. Just the shape of it being, like, surprisingly articulated. not exactly what you would expect going into it, or even to look at it. You ride it and you're like, oh, that feels different. Great ride. Really can't say enough great things about these rides. Really glad that they're open because you guys, like, this ride was plagued with problems from day one. It really took an entire 5 years, I think, to get the rides to the point where they were operating consistently. They were running for a week in 2010, and then they closed because there was some issues with the human train. These rides opened as 4-across coasters. They use a big, beefy track system that at the time was pretty much unique for Vekoma. It would be similar to what they would end up developing for, like, the Tron coasters, with that big, giant pylon in the center.
I mean, it was definitely revolutionary, ahead of its time.
And when you look at these rides and the way the clearances were designed, they were designed to accommodate a 4-across train navigating these elements, but they had issues with pacing, with the trains being really heavy, and the human side had stress fractures right away. So they took the ride offline for a year, went back to the drawing board. When the coasters opened again in 2011, I think July 2011, they reopened with the 4-across trains. Then they ran for, I think, 2.5 years with that configuration. I want to say they closed at the end of 2013. Does that sound about right?
Oh, I can't remember.
Something like that. There's actually a pretty precise timeline on Wikipedia. We were looking at it a couple weeks ago of, like, when the coasters opened and closed, but basically they opened for a week and then they were closed for a year, and then they reopened for at least 2 years, maybe 2.5 years, and then they were closed for like another 2 years. And then when they finally reopened, like for the last time, they finally reopened in like July of 2015, and they opened with new rolling stock that were only 2 across instead of 4 across, to help with things like pacing and stress and whatnot. I think Universal and Vekoma probably had a pretty rough go of it. They haven't worked with Vekoma since this ride opened. And that includes things like, if you're wondering why Flight of Hippogriff in Beijing was like the small Mac version that Universal Studios Hollywood got and not the larger ones that like Singapore or, the Airways, the Magic Airways or Enchanted Airways, or Flight of the Hippogriff in Orlando, or the one in Osaka. It's because like they're not working with Vekoma anymore. And I think that was probably related to how things went down with Battlestar Galactica, because it was a rough 5 years for them. But now everything seems to have panned out. Battlestar Galactica is like an important transitional period. It occupies an important timeline in the overall Vekoma trajectory, because before Battlestar Galactica, I think Vekoma's reputation was still tethered a lot to stuff like Vekoma SLCs and boomerangs, and a lot of their better attractions were like family coasters that they were developing for Disney. And Battlestar Galactica, while troubled, was an amazing concept that is still an incredible ride and has been followed up with substantial developments for Vekoma that are just some of the best roller coasters in the world. Things like Fly and Tron and Cosmic Rewind and the next generation of launch coasters, and like their various like their looping coasters, the coasters that they have in Poland and such. So like that was a huge turning point for them. Getting Battlestar Galactica developed and online was like a huge shift in Vekoma from like a developer that everybody knows them for like Disney coasters and like unpleasant suspended looping coasters at regional parks, to like building incredible, smooth, brilliantly engineered like blockbuster looping coasters and thrill coasters and such. But yeah, definitely I think one of our favorite coasters. It was my top bucket list coasters, and it was really a thrill
it's funny
to ride them
because
again.
Just in a couple of days, I got my bucket list coasters that I had been trying to get on for years.
Oh yeah,
because
right.
I got Battlestar Galactica, and then not even like 5 days later, I went to Taiwan. Oh, actually no, I went like 2 weeks later.
Oh, that's right, because your first time.
It was the weather was bad. Anyway, maybe within like a month time, I also went to Taiwan a couple times, and then I managed to get on Gravity Max. So I got all my big Vekoma, Dream Team,
Tropical Asia
out there,
Vekomas.
like humidity Vekomas.
Yeah.
I got them all. So that was good. But yeah, Battlestar Galactica was definitely like my number one for many reasons, including the fact that it's Vekoma, the Vekoma invert / GIB aspect of it, and of course the franchise that I love. So that was pleasant to get. But yeah, so Battlestar Galactica, of course, being the biggest focus of the day, we managed getting on Human twice, Asylum three times, which is pretty good because of how we wrote.
And we got front and back on both coasters.
Yeah, we got front and back on both coasters, which is unique because they don't really choose rows there, and for Express Pass, especially, you do not get front row.
Yeah.
So that all worked out pretty well. And on the way out, there's a Starbucks there that I love because they have like this oolong grapefruit tea that's really good, and this lychee cheesecake. And an egg mayo croissant. And since I love this selection of stuff that they have at the Singaporean Starbucks, we took a quick stop there on the way out. We did some merch shopping a little bit. Alice got something. And merch is pretty good.
Sean bought me a keychain from his visit.
Yeah, and it had like a waterproof theme park hat that had the logo on it that I bought for myself.
So he got me a keychain from his visit, and then I got myself one for my visit, and I cherish them both.
So we did that, and then we left. And I think... when we went to the gardens by the bay and stuff, but that can be a whole other episode and everything else to do in Singapore, so we will not discuss that really. But I do want to kind of talk about a little bit about the park's overall feel and how it compares to other parks. So like we've mentioned a couple times already, the park is tiny. The park is not very big because it's part of a larger resort that has aquariums and water park and like a dolphin setup, golf courses, resorts, pools, pirate ships. I mean, there's a lot going on. Like, it is a resort world,
like
but
the
as
space
the name
that
would
takes
say.
Up the golf courses is like exponentially larger.
Yeah, so Resorts World Sentosa is massive. However, the park is so nicely designed, so concise, and not a single wasted inch. You have the outer loop and the inner loop of the parks, and it's well themed, well maintained for the most part. I think all things considered, it doesn't feel like it's lacking. It doesn't feel like, it's a smaller park, it lacks stuff.
It is a solid roster.
Because when you think of parks like Universal Studios Florida, Universal Studios Beijing particularly, and even Universal Studios Osaka, there are some parts of the park that are so lacking and so boring and so much space between notable shit. That is not a problem at Universal Studios Singapore. Universal Studios Singapore is like bam, 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 bam.
Yeah.
You walk 5 feet, like there's another major
Universal
attraction.
Concentrate.
And the way that the sidelines have been worked out by having canopies for half of the park, having Battlestar Galactica like a wall of steel coaster, having thematic elements inside of the mummy area, then having the trees and the canopies and another kind of like structure that hovers over the Jurassic Park entrance. The castle walls of Far, Far Away, the lands actually are some of the best sidelighted lands of any Universal Park. Usually you have like the Potter lands that are doing pretty good at it, and that's about it for Universal Parks in my opinion. Like everything kind of bleeds in a way that you can see other lands from far away. But this park, like once you're in a land, it's kind of hard to see other lands. Even the way they had the large palm trees inside of the mummy area, you don't even see Battlestar that much. Like it's not like Battlestar's dead.
They did a really smart job.
They did a great job.
Having thematic elements that are in the foreground. Like, even if you can see Battlestar Galactica from, like, the mummy area, there's palm trees and other tall focal points that you see first. Like, you can't hide Battlestar Galactica when it's in the center of the park like that, but they do a nice job of making sure that what you see first, what you're supposed to be looking at, even if you look directly at the coaster, is stuff that's in the themed area that you're in.
100%. So that's something they did really well. And so I think the overall quality of the rides is some of the better average quality than most Universal parks. Because again, the classic Universal rides that are lacking here are not, generally speaking, high quality. Jaws was meh. E.T. is okay. You know, like I'm saying, like I think the original classics of Universal that people idolize a little bit aren't all that great.
This park was
so I don't feel like it's lacking that either.
Quantum leap from Universal Studios Beijing, from Osaka. Universal Studios Japan was very much like Universal Studios Florida, essentially, but with Jurassic Park in the back. Whereas this park, they really didn't concern themselves with building a lot of the, standard... Like, they didn't worry about Back to the Future. They didn't add E.T. They really
none of the boring gray shit is there. Like, none of the show-building stuff is there.
They really just... completely flipped the script and
I feel like they applied the Universal Islands of Adventure filter by it being thematic lands with naturalistic edges.
It's definitely
and then applied it to the Universal Studios kind of idea of like you still have New York, you still have Hollywood, But then the actual themed lands are like the park feels a lot more like Islands of Adventure, but tinier.
Yeah.
It doesn't feel like a studios park, and in the way Beijing feels more like a studio park than this does. But on the grand scale of parks, it is a force to be reckoned with because the quality of the lineup is honestly good. You got six roller coasters,
4 of which are totally one of a kind.
And then you have a major water ride, an incredibly significantly popular stunt show that we all know, Waterworld.
Mm-hmm.
You have major dark rides.
E-ticket dark ride and like a nice D-ticket dark ride.
You know, like it is a good lineup for the park that size. Not adding the Minion Land to it with another dark ride.
And they have lights, camera, action.
Lights, camera, action, really also a show / dark ride experience.
That ride is definitely, like, that attraction is definitely checking the studio park box because the whole attraction is themed to, like, showing how special effects work. It's very much in the vein of, like, old Universal, but in just a modern, compartmentalized, compact attraction. Beijing has it too.
And then there's value. And I think the big thing about value is that Universal parks are stupid expensive. The amount that they can charge you for a one-day ticket just for University of Florida is honestly like criminal.
Yeah.
And then don't even talk about the express pass prices for any park except for Singapore.
And like Hollywood is expensive too. We love Universal Hollywood and the polish is there. But man, it is expensive.
They're expensive parks, very expensive. And in fact, they're more expensive than Disney parks.
Yeah.
And especially from the line systems, everyone can complain all they want about, like, now you're paying a couple bucks for a lightning lane, whatever. Universal's Express Pass has always been so expensive. And in Osaka, we paid like $300 a person just for add-ons for Express Pass, just to get on the rides. Like, we have spent a lot of cash at Universal Parks. And here, it was the cheapest admission, easiest admission, cheapest Express Pass, best Express Pass. And it didn't cost much. And Singapore is not by all means a cheap destination. Like, Singapore is one of the more expensive places in Asia to visit, to go, to eat. Like,
it's one of the most expensive tourist destinations in the world.
Yeah, like it is kind of like Hong Kong. Like, it's expensive. Yeah. And the fact that we got all that, and operations aren't the best, but I think the overall value, everything was open. We got on everything. Express Pass didn't cost a whole lot.
Express Pass made it a breeze.
I mean, per person, US dollars, and the pricing fluctuates a little bit on the season at this park. We went on a red day, like a busiest day. We went and we spent $150 a person USD. Maybe a little bit less. Maybe about $150.
The food was really good. And
the food is good, large portions, inexpensive.
Yeah.
I think overall, like, it's a really good experience for what you get.
You can do this park like a king for $200 a person.
Including food and everything.
In and out in 6 hours. Take your time. Ride everything.
Take photos. Whatever you want to do. Enjoy yourself.
And you come out of the park and you don't even feel that exhausted.
You're satisfied.
Aside from like the weather,
and it's a pleasant experience getting to the park, leaving the park. And, I mean, it's like a polar opposite experience of a Universal Beijing time, or even a Universal Osaka times. Like, I think my favorite Asian Universal park, believe it or not,
is Singapore.
Is the tiny little Singapore that is not even operated by Universal, because it is just a pleasant experience.
I think of this,
had fun.
Like the six
all
parks,
the times I've been.
I could rank the parks very easily in my mind. Especially, I could put them in A tier and like B tier.
Okay, let me guess your rankings though.
I bet you can.
Okay, IOA number 1.
IOA is my
Hollywood number 2.
Hollywood is 2.
Singapore
is 3. And that's the
and then Osaka 4.
4.
And then Beijing is 5. And then Florida.
And Universal Studios Florida could almost be like in its own tier below the other Asia parks.
Yeah,
I think of them as A team and B team, but I almost don't even think it's fair to put Universal Studios Osaka and Universal Studios Beijing in the same category as Florida, because Universal Studios Florida is so unbelievably bad. Unless you're there for Horror Nights, that park is so bad. Or you've never been, maybe,
but it's not a good park.
That park is just an embarrassment.
We have an episode about that, too.
We have a whole episode on how Universal Studios Florida is bad. And that they have literally, for the last 10 years, added virtually nothing of substance to that park in 10 years. And
it's all just like loosely themed, rethemed.
There is more,
Minion Land.
There is more in that park that needs to be changed and fixed than there is in that park that is actually working.
Oh yeah, there's like one singular thing that's working there. It's Diagon Alley. That's it. That's it. Dark times.
Truly a blank canvas with lots of room for improvement.
Yeah, like once Epic Universe opens, Epic just closed Universe Studios Florida, demolish the habitat and restart.
Start over.
And then apply the same formula. Anyway. So yeah, we really do like Singapore a lot. And I feel a lot of people don't like Singapore a lot and kind of crap on it. Maybe it's because lineup-wise and size-wise doesn't look as great. But from overall experiences, of having done all the Universal parks several times for me, I guess.
Honestly, knock down Universal Studios Florida and build Universal Studios Singapore. Like, replace it with the exact park. You've already got Mummy, and Transformers are already in place.
Yeah. And who needs Jurassic Park Rapids Adventure here? It's so trashy anyway. In Orlando. It's like the worst version.
100%.
So, having said all that, we did really enjoy the park. It's worth a visit if you're out there. Of course, traveling all the way there is difficult unless you have the situation we had. I was working the trip, so we had the hotel. I got paid to be in Singapore.
Yeah, the only reason I would agree to go to Singapore for 36 hours.
Because I told Alex, like, I don't really want to do Singapore on a vacation because I already been a couple times and I had long layovers there. So I've already done a lot of Singapore. And I was like, I don't really want to be on a plane for 17 and a half hours to go to Singapore just to be there to do what I've already done. So it worked out really well. We were just there for my work and Alex came with us passengers. So it was a cute look for us. And with that, I want to remind you guys to check out all the other episodes. We have like 6 mainland China episodes. We have an episode on Efteling. We did an episode on Penguin Track, Phoenix Rising. Phoenix Rising, and Tiana's Bayou Adventure. And then we have an episode now about University of Singapore, and then we're going to also talk about some Taiwan parks, and we'll do some more Europe talking, and we want to talk about D23. Lots coming up. Lots is past. Leave us a review on your favorite podcast platform. We'll give you a shout out. 5 stars preferably, of course. And that is kind of wrapping it up. I'm kind of rambling here. So we'll see you guys in the next episode. Bye.
Bye.